Hey guys, this is just another overview of what we talked about this past Sunday at Encounter. The title of the sermon was Engaging Those Who Are Different. We talked about the resurrection, of course, during this Easter season. We talked about how, because Jesus Christ, even though he was Jewish and the prophecies have been from the nation of Israel all through the Old Testament, that when Christ came, he came not just for Jewish people, but he came for all mankind. You know, he left heaven, which was a very comfortable place for him, and he engaged us. And so when we look at what Jesus did and we look at the resurrection, we get this theme that God engages those who are different than him, and that the after Jesus rose from the dead, that this gospel message is for all nations. Then we get this idea that God is also inviting us to engage those who are different. Every one of us struggle with wanting to stay in our clique, wanting to stay in our comfort zone. We find people who have our political affiliation. We find people who do similar jobs, or they're Cubs fans like we are, they're Cardinal fan, whatever. But we have our groups that we stay in. And what we see in Jesus' life is that he was not content to stay in those groups because he came for all people. And one of the ways we know the resurrection is real, and we can study the historical documentation, we can study the resurrection fact, we can try to make an apologetic argument that would convince any atheist that Jesus rose from the dead. Well, that's fine, but if people can't see Christ in us, then it doesn't matter how many statistics we can quote and how we can try to prove from history and from prophecy and all these different things that Jesus rose. People need to see the fact that the resurrected Christ lives in us. And one of the ways that they do that is when they see that we're willing to engage out of love, that the love of God has touched us, and we're willing to engage whoever, whenever, however we can with this message of love and salvation. It says in Ephesians 2:14, "For Christ himself has brought us peace. He united Jew and Gentile into one people when in his own body on the cross he broke down the wall of hostility." It says in Colossians 3:11, "Here in Christ there's no Gentile or Jew or circumcised, uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave or free, but Christ is all and is in all. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourself with compassion." So we need to have compassion on people. When we study Luke, because Luke is the Gentile gospel writer, he's different than the others. He's not Jewish. And he wrote about a lot of themes. He wrote about the poor, and he wrote about lepers, and he wrote about women, and he wrote about people who were different and on the margin. It is kind of a theme for him. And it is really cool. I mean, he's the one that wrote about the prodigal son. He's the one that wrote about the Good Samaritan and how the Levite and the um, uh, the priest passed by the man in a ditch, but the Good Samaritan didn't. And Jesus was that kind of guy. He Zacchaeus comes to him, a story that's unique in Luke. And Zacchaeus was a traitor. Zacchaeus was a Jewish man working for the mob in a lot of ways. I mean, it was a corrupt way of doing taxes. And Zacchaeus had been robbing people. He was rich, but Jesus didn't just say, "Hey, Zacchaeus, let's go to the synagogue and do a Bible study." He said, "Zacchaeus, I'm going to your house today." He engaged him. Jesus engaged children. And you look all throughout the book of Luke, and we just hit a bunch of highlights of these different passages. I mean, there wasn't anybody. Everyone was fair game with Jesus. And so what we just try to do is we try to ask the tough question, who has God brought in your life that it may be a family member. Being a missionary to your own family is a lot of times the toughest mission field. It may be a little Africa. It may be there's someone in your life who honestly their life is a mess right now, and it's messy, and you wouldn't even know how to counsel them, how to help them, and they just need to see the love of Christ. They just need someone to be with them. But Jesus in the resurrection is about engagement. When we engage the people that others are running away from, that's when the world will see resurrection power in us. Paul said in Philippians 3:10, he said, "I want to know Christ, yes, to know the power of his resurrection and participation in his suffering, becoming like him in his death, and so somehow attaining to the resurrection from the dead." That word know is experience. Paul said, "I don't want to just simply know about the fact that the tomb is empty." He said, "I want to experience the power of the resurrection, a changed life, a changed heart, someone who's passionate about engaging." You look at Paul's life, and he went to so many different people, and many times beat up and rejected, like Christ himself. Who is it that you can engage? Who is it that God has brought in your path to influence and to love. And I just encourage you this Easter season to make the resurrection a lot more than a theology. Make it a changed life in you, a changed heart, that you would be willing to go and be a missionary to whoever, whenever, and however God has called you. Then people will see Christ has really risen from the dead.